The storm is just going to get worse. Do you remember that line from The Day After Tomorrow? How did you perceive that apocalyptic narrative turned reality?
Indeed, we are all too acquainted with such scenarios portrayed in films, are we not? They often express our worst fears and reflect societal anxieties.
From nuclear warfare and alien invasions to climate change and disease outbreaks, it's intriguing to question whether the apocalypse could truly be triggered by such extreme events.
And not just intriguing, but also sobering. Contemplating the causes behind these apocalyptic narratives is a heavy journey, but necessary.
Remember, once the fallout has ended, survival is possible. Mad Max, that dystopian saga, so vivid in its depiction of nuclear apocalypse.
Very true, Olivia. That blunt optimism is a harsh contrast considering the bleak world it visually presents.
Absolutely, it's a chilling adaptation of what could happen post-nuclear war. Society reverts into tribes, resources become scarce, and everything changes.
Yeah, the scarcity of resources becomes the new normal. Now I've been thinking, knowing our society's dependence on resources, it's terrifying to question the extent of adjustments required in a nuclear fallout scenario.
Nuclear warfare in movies manipulate our hidden fears, amplifying them. It's the threat of a complete societal breakdown. Mad Max made that scenario palpable.
But it also gives us a look at resilience, doesn't it? It paints a picture of survival and deepens our understanding of the human spirit. Amidst all chaos, humanity finds a way, right?
Somehow, yes. But it also resonates a question. What is the cost of that survival? In the case of Mad Max, it questions our ethical boundaries.
A bitter reality indeed. Movies imitate life, and somewhere within these narratives is a shudder-inducing truth that nuclear warfare could well be mankind's self-destruction episode.
The nuclear warfare narrative really began to emerge as a prominent theme in post-apocalyptic films during the Cold War, didn't it?
Yes, that's right. That period of tension between the East and the West undoubtedly fueled the making of such films.
War of the Worlds is a prime example. Here we analyze not only fears, but also politics of the 1950s era. The concept of an alien invasion was an external reflection of the internal fear of the other, a foreign power invading their territories.
In a way, it was a masked illustration of the Cold War itself. Fear of the unknown, fear of destruction, fear of power, a fight between alien forces and humans, mirroring the reality of two global superpowers ready to plunge into nuclear warfare.
Do you think this fear still resonates today, JungKyu?
In a different context, perhaps? The idea of a nuclear warfare no longer lives in the realm of the unknown. We know the destruction it can cause. We have witnessed it. Today, the fear lies in the reality, the possibility of such an event.
That's terrifyingly true. Movies, in that sense, allow us to reflect upon our fears. A screen becomes a mirror, don't you think? War of the Worlds. An alien invasion played out in such thrilling sequences. Let's talk about that for a moment. How about we delve into the fear of unknown the movie capitalizes on, JungKyu?
Sure. The fear of unknown here isn't strictly about extraterrestrial beings, but a power much advanced than us, a power we understand very little.
Right, a power that can cause widespread destruction. And it's that fear that's the crux of the movie. The fear amplified by the unknown nature of our invaders.
And that's an interesting comparison with the fear of nuclear apocalypse. Nuclear warfare, you see, is a man-made disaster, something we've come to understand to an extent.
Whereas with an alien invasion, the threat comes from outside our world. We just have hypotheses and theories about the capabilities of extraterrestrial beings.
Indeed. And these theories exacerbate the fear. Compare that to nuclear warfare, and the fear of the unknown takes an entirely new dimension, don't you think, Olivia?
Absolutely, JungKyu. And that's what movies like War of the Worlds ingeniously play upon. They present a scenario where humanity is in the dark, facing a threat much larger than anything we truly comprehend. The Day After Tomorrow. This film presents a dramatic scenario where climate change triggers a catastrophic series of natural disasters that usher in a new ice age.
Arguably, The Day After Tomorrow exaggerates the immediacy and extreme nature of climate change effects, but it does reflect a real fear of anthropogenic climate changes having irreversible catastrophic consequences.
Yes, and the scientific accuracy of that scale of imminent climate change disaster could be debated, but the underlying premise of climate being a ticking time bomb is unfortunately very real.
That's true, Olivia. In the movie, the focus is not just on the disaster, but also on the struggle for survival in the aftermath. The depiction of social panic, oppressive cold, scarcity of resources, these are concerns that would realistically arise if climate change were to lead to such an apocalypse.
Indeed, the portrayal is overtly dramatized for cinematic impact. Yet, it effectively echoes a deep-seated anxiety regarding the impact of our actions on the environment. Don't you agree, JungKyu?
Absolutely, Olivia. And not just that, the narrative subtly outlines our societal insensitivity to gradual long-term harms. We see that same insensitivity in our real-life approach to environmental issues. It's no longer just about the polar ice caps melting or some distant island sinking. It is about us, our cities, our today.
From climate devastation to a very different, yet equally intimidating scenario: pandemic. Remember the chillingly realistic portrayal of a viral pandemic in Contagion? The movie nearly mirrors a real-world scenario, wouldn't you say, JungKyu?
That's how it felt to me, Olivia. Reflecting back on Contagion, the movie evoked just the right amount of fear, dread, and suspense. Society's response and the political maneuvering felt disturbingly real. I'll never forget the scene where the medical team in the CDC is trying to trace and contain the outbreak.
An apt point, JungKyu. Recent events have heightened that fear, haven't they? The world had a taste of a real pandemic scenario with COVID-19. It's been a terrifying reality check, to say the least.
That's right, Olivia. Contagion, eerily enough, screened a decade before COVID-19. It certainly feels as though life has imitated art. The widespread chaos, the desperation, and the thinly veiled fear in everyone's eyes, it's all too familiar now.
I'm thinking about those lines by Dr. Cheever in the movie. Somewhere in the world, the wrong pig met up with the wrong bat. Fiction grappled with zoonotic spillover much before we had a real-life instance to consider. That's what I find really fascinating about narratives like Contagion.
Definitely, Olivia. It provokes thoughts around our preparedness for such situations. That's why I believe movies like Contagion should be viewed in a different light beyond their entertainment value. They can potentially be warning signals or resources for public awareness.
Did you notice how each movie portrays vastly different causes for an apocalypse, JungKyu? It ranges from climate disasters, epidemics, to nuclear events and alien invasions.
I did, Olivia. A trend I found is that some of these cataclysms are man-made, like nuclear warfare, while others, like a pandemic or climate change, though affected by human activities, are essentially natural disasters.
That's an interesting distinction, JungKyu. What are your thoughts on why man-made disasters, such as nuclear warfare, often feature in apocalyptic narratives?
Narratives around nuclear apocalypse often reflect anxieties stemming from historical events, like the Cold War. They symbolize humanity's fear of its own destructive capabilities. However, natural disasters serve as a reminder of our vulnerability against forces of nature that are beyond our control.
That's true. Let's not forget how some movies depict sudden alien invasions or asteroid impacts, adding an element of extraterrestrial or cosmic catastrophe. These scenarios portray an even greater fear of the unknown, spanning beyond the limitations of our planet. War of the Worlds comes to mind, too.
Exactly, Olivia. Though when compared to a disaster like a pandemic, I feel that alien invasions are less likely. Diseases have caused large-scale destruction multiple times in human history, and with movies like Contagion, it definitely strikes a nerve.
I definitely see your point, JungKyu. Comparing these various causes really underlines the diverse range of fears and anxieties that influence the creators of these narratives. discussing these apocalyptic triggers wouldn't be complete without addressing how political decisions and misuse of power contribute to these scenarios. Remember Mad Max's dystopian reality, JungKyu? It was formed in part due to a nuclear war ignited by political conflicts.
Exactly. The war depicted represented a rough, anarchic world where scarcity and desperation reigned, all ramifications of political decisions and misused power. It brings to life a fear deeply rooted in our cultures, that of self-destruction as a result of political instability.
Now, isn't that the harsh truth? How political decisions and global unrest can lead to threats of nuclear attacks, and potentially, an apocalypse. The Day After Tomorrow also hinted at ineffective responses from administrative bodies to climate change, didn't it?
Well pointed out, authors cleverly hinted at our contemporary denial and mishandling of environmental crisis, which could be fatal. The theme has always fascinated me, how cinema uses post-apocalyptic narratives to critique current political behaviors.
Right? And then there's Contagion. Each country's government in the movie dealt differently with the outbreak, didn't they? It kind of exemplified the reality of different political viewpoints leading to varied measures, and consequently varying impacts on the epidemic.
Exactly, Olivia. It just reveals how politics can amplify an already horrifying situation. Transitively, it makes one wonder, are we in fact our own worst enemies?
So we've dissected how movies present scenarios of apocalyptic proportions, be it nuclear war, environmental disaster, alien invasion, or a disease outbreak. The question to ask is, how close or far are we from these fictional narratives?
Very poignant, Olivia. If we think about it, we've seen a semblance of contagion in real life with the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, it might not be as drastic as the movie, but it certainly brought a certain level of dread that was once limited to the cinema screens.
Interesting point, JungKyu. While the sweeping waves of contagion and ensuing chaos may have been elevated for artistic purposes, the essence of a global pandemic was undeniably captured. It reminds us of the fragility of human life, doesn't it?
Agreed. Environmental disaster, as seen in The Day After Tomorrow, is another cause that's eerily close. With climate change accelerating, we're already witnessing intense weather patterns, ice melts, and sea level rise. But thankfully, we're not yet at the point of a sudden ice age triggering apocalypse. Still, the movie does make us contemplate our relationship with Earth.
And it's not just Earth we should worry about. War of the Worlds' alien invasion scenario may seem far-fetched, but with our expanding knowledge of outer space, who's to say it's totally implausible? NASA recently reported the discovery of over 4,000 exoplanets, some with conditions conducive to life. Perhaps, someday, an invasion might not seem purely the stuff of movies.
Indeed. As for Mad Max's nuclear war scenario, thankfully, we can say it's less likely, given our global treaties and checks against nuclear warfare. However, the geopolitical tensions and the sheer existence of nuclear arsenal can't be ignored. It serves as a chilling reminder of humanity's self-destructive potential.
Let's take The Day After Tomorrow, for example. The film throws us into a climate change catastrophe. While I do believe they've overdramatized the speed of climate changes, the essence of a disaster triggered by the disruption of ocean currents is terrifying. It mirrors the real-world implications of our actions on the environment.
I agree about the overdramatization, but what bothered me was that the economic implications were completely glossed over. Anyway, moving on to Mad Max, what are your thoughts, Olivia?
Well, Mad Max portrays an interesting societal change post-nuclear war. It depicts a barren world with resources rather scarce. The characters fight over every little thing, underlining the reality of what scarcity would induce. Although we can't say it's an accurate depiction, it's indeed a grim possibility.
Yep, striking how Mad Max emphasizes the potential breakdown of society. On a different note, War of the Worlds. Personally, I think they could have elaborated more on the alien invasion aspect. What did you think about it?
I must say that War of the Worlds showcases our innate fear of the unknown, of invasion from the extraterrestrial. However, the science behind it, that's where the depiction is rather lacking. Speaking of unknown, A more immediate earthbound threat has been demonstrated in Contagion.
I found Contagion terrifying, especially with the recent pandemic. It has painted an eerily accurate picture of a fast-spreading virus. The movie was terrifyingly realistic, reflecting our apprehensions brilliantly.
Diving deeper into public reception, JungKyu. How did you feel when watching The Day After Tomorrow? I remember the film created quite a stir upon its release.
True, the inclement conditions and the rush of evacuations was gripping, although I did feel that some of the scientific aspects were oversimplified, which may have contributed to its success in the box office. On the flip side, Mad Max was brilliantly visual, but perhaps the dystopian outlook was a bit intense for the audience.
Interesting. Some critics argue it's not entirely about the cause, though. It's how truthfully it is projected, and how relatable it is to the current socio-political context. War of the Worlds, for example, was criticized for having little scientific accuracy. Yet, Contagion was praised for its approach towards a pandemic, which, I believe, resonated with people, especially now.
Indeed. That brings us to the key, doesn't it? The realness or believability factor. The narrative around climate change, disease outbreaks, and nuclear warfares seem to have a greater impact on audiences as they hold a mirror to plausible scenarios in our world.
And speculatively, fiction such as alien invasions can sometimes seem far-fetched and less relatable to our audiences. So, are we saying that audiences prefer concepts that are closer to reality?
Maybe we can't generalize that. A balance of intrigue, fear, and believability perhaps makes for a successful apocalypse movie. While, I must say, some themes did receive more love both from the critics and the audience. Now that we've explored different causes of apocalyptic events in these movies, we're curious to hear your thoughts on what resonated with you most. Olivia, it was interesting hearing your perspective on The Day After Tomorrow and its exaggerated representation of climate change. However, I'm keen on seeing what our audience thinks.
Absolutely, JungKyu. And listeners, it's your turn. We invite you all to share your thoughts. Among The Day After Tomorrow, Contagion, War of the Worlds, and Mad Max, which movie's apocalyptic trigger do you believe is most plausible? Was it the swift climate change, the rapid pandemic spread, the surprise alien invasion, or the nuclear fallout?
As we've discussed throughout this series, each narrative taps into a particular set of societal fears and can be seen as a reflection of its time. On a global scale, where do you see the highest possibility? Environmental collapse, global health crisis, out-of-this-world invasion, or man-made disasters?
We're taking it a step further. Let's put these apocalyptic scenarios to a test. We'll be launching a poll on our website asking you to vote for what you believe is the most accurately depicted apocalypse. Is it the frigid Earth of The Day After Tomorrow, the chaotic post-war reality of Mad Max, the pandemic-ridden world of Contagion, or perhaps the alien-invaded Earth in War of the Worlds?
Remember, this isn't about popularity. We're interested in your thoughts about the movie's success in portraying a certain apocalypse trigger accurately. What moved you or convinced you most? Your feedback will help us and fellow listeners gain a deeper understanding of our collective perspectives.
Reflecting on these films, it's unsettling how the themes mirror our current societal atmosphere.
Right. The correlation is almost uncanny, each narrative highlighting real-world fears that exist today.
To say the least. It seems apocalypse on screen often leans towards the extreme, an element of spectacle, if you will. For The Day After Tomorrow, the filmmakers could have represented climate change accurately, but they instead opted for catastrophically speedy climate change. Thoughts, JungKyu?
I guess they use these exaggerated portrayals to emphasize the severity and urgency of real-world issues. Nevertheless, we should also be wary of the danger in dissemination of misleading information. The wrong perception may birth a false sense of security or needless panic.
I agree. The same could be said for Contagion. Drawing lines with our current pandemic, the movie may seem eerily realistic, perhaps too much so. Yet even there, the speed at which the disease spreads and its consequences, they seem a bit exaggerated.
And let's not forget Mad Max with its desolate wasteland and population scrambling for resources, again an extreme portrayal. But its depiction of societal change after a nuclear fallout certainly leaves you pondering.
Rightly so. Now, stepping into fictional territories like War of the Worlds, where do you think filmmakers will go next? What fears, existing or new, do you imagine will serve as future plot devices?
In essence, art often mirrors life. I believe filmmakers will continue to tap into our societal fears, evolving with the times. From human-made apocalypses to nature striking back, the narratives are endless. Maybe the barrier to the alien genre might even be broken down further.
Quite possible. Apocalyptic narratives in films, they're more than just entertainment. They serve as a mirror and a magnifying glass, reflecting and dissecting our societal structure, fears, and priorities.
Undoubtedly. As viewers, we can revel in the action, suspense, and fantasy, but it's crucial to remember the implications and questions these narratives subtly raise. In an age rife with uncertainty, they stand as cautionary tales, urging us to be more vigilant of the path we tread.
Throughout this episode, we've journeyed deep into varied causes behind apocalyptic scenarios in movies like The Day After Tomorrow, Contagion, War of the Worlds, Mad Max.
Yes, from climate change leading to catastrophic weather shifts in The Day After Tomorrow, to the terrifying pandemic in Contagion.
We navigated the combat-ridden, desolate wasteland in Mad Max after a nuclear fallout, and broached extraterrestrial territories in War of the Worlds.
Each movie providing a window into distinct fear facets of our society, fears that we must heed to steer clear of such dystopia.
And while today's discussion centered on the onset causes, we're far from done. What follows the apocalypse?
Finding way out of rubble? The struggle for survival? Our next episode dives into just that, the immediate aftermath of these instigative events.
Join us as we unwrap the survival mechanisms presented in these movies and theorize how society restructures itself. What does the New World Order look like?
And in this new world, who holds power? How do politics and societal dynamics morph? We pledge to dissect these pivotal questions and more in our upcoming episode.
Returning to our initial question, what humanity dreads lies at the core of these movies' instigative causes. Fear of technological progress, tensions from global conflicts, and the increasingly imperceptible boundary between fiction and reality.
By decoding these societal fears, post-apocalyptic movies offer critical insights. They compel us to reflect on our collective actions and understand the consequences they hold for our shared future.
They act as visual hypotheses of our worst predictions, alarming us, pushing us to wield our influence responsibly, to course correct before it's too late.
And as we navigate through these dystopian narratives, we need your perspectives. Let's dissect, debate, and delve into these scenarios together.
Shared wisdom often holds the key to complex dilemmas, and who knows? Maybe in our shared curiosity we might stumble upon a path to prevent such dystopia.
So, don't just observe. Participate. Your insights are valuable. Do not hesitate to reach out, for they may spark a conversation, a revelation, that might just help us avert the apocalypse.